And hello everyone, welcome back to your Flask tutorial. So in the previous tutorial we discussed a lot of things such as how to install and run Flask, how to set up a basic Flask application, and all of that good stuff. Let's actually start from scratch. Now here we can just say from Flask import Flask, and then app is equal to Flask name, and there we go. And then to add a route, we can say app.route, and we'll be discussing this in this tutorial. And then just create a function, hello world, and this will return hello world. Cool. Now if we say Flask run, then if we refresh, we get hello world. If you made it as far, then good job. Now in this tutorial, we'll be discussing routes. Now route is just a fancy word for endpoint. And endpoint is just a fancy word for URL. And URL is just a fancy word for link. This is the link to this page. If we go here, at the end of our link, there's nothing, and that means the slash is theoretically there. For example, let's create another route. Let's just copy and paste and call this ping. Now this ping route, we can just call ping here in the function. Two functions should never have the same name. Just remember that. That's basic Python. That's not even part of Flask. And then here we can just say you have been pinged. There we go. Now if we refresh, we won't really see any changes. However, if we go to this URL up here and we change that to /ping. Well, it does say /ping here. Actually, you know what? I think my Flask isn't updating. Let's see. Ah, yes, it just wasn't updating. Okay. Now, I don't know why it's not updating. It's supposed to be doing that on its own, but it's fine. Cool. So now if you go to /ping, it will say you have been pinged. If we go to just /, it will say hello world. /ping, you have been pinged. So this right here says what will display when you go to that location on the link. So here, /ping will show you this. So by just attaching it to the end of the link, you'll see what you have asked for here. So that is the basics of routing actually. You have your slash and then where you want to go. We can add another one as an example. /ping, instead of ping, we can say Mike. And in here we can say your name is Mike. Now if we go to, instead of ping, we go to Mike. And my bad, I forgot to rename this to Mike. There we go. Now if we refresh, we say your name is Mike. If we go to ping, it will say you have been pinged. If we go to just the home page, then it says hello world. So routing is what's happening here up in the links, in the URL. By changing that, you are saying where you're going to. Of course, if you enter something that doesn't exist, it's just going to return not found. Cool. Now, on topic of this Mike character, let's say we want to create a URL or an endpoint that says hello. So say hello. And we want to get the user's name from the URL. Well, to do that, we can just say in these bigger than, smaller than symbols, name. And now, if we go here and we say Mike, and my bad, I forgot to actually say name here. So basically, whatever you call this here and you want it here, you just say name and then pass it in here as well as a variable. Now, if we refresh, then it says your name is Mike. We're not actually using this name here, so let's create an F string and then we pass in name here. And that should actually be this one right here, name. Now if we go here and we refresh, it will still say Mike. If we go to, instead of Mike, we were to say Jack, then it will say your name is Jack. But hold up, we have a ping route. So what will happen if we type in ping? Well, it will just say you have been pinged. So this URL, since it has specifically been specified, will overwrite this URL if it's used. So if we were to say Mike instead of ping here, and someone were to enter Mike here, then it will no longer go to your name is Mike, it will go to you have been pinged, because it was here first. Now you can make it more complex. For example, we can say users is equal to an array where the ID is, and then we can give it a number, and then name, and we give it a name, Mike. Cool. Let's copy this 2 more times. So 1, 2, 3, and in here we say, instead of Mike, we say Nick, and here we say Jack. Cool. Now imagine this is our database where we're storing some data. Now we want to display a user depending on their ID. Well, we can do that. Here we say ID, and here we can just specify ID. Now the problem here is we won't know the difference between a name and an ID. So we can't use this endpoint anymore because it doesn't know which one to go for. So instead we say user and then slash, and then we pass in an ID. And here we can just say get user. Now it will, when we go here and we say user slash and then put a number in there, it will give us the ID. For example, and let's just actually move this to above. So right here. Now we can say user is equal to nothing. And then for user in users, if user dot or ID is equal to the ID that's passed in, then we want to return user name. Cool. But if it's not in here, we don't actually need that user anymore. We can just say user not found. Cool. So this is some basic Python where we're just searching through this user array for the user that has this ID, and if they have that ID, we pass it in. But we need to make sure this ID is parsed as a number, an integer. So we're converting it to an integer. Cool. Now if we say Mike, and this will just take us to your name is Mike. Now if we go to user /1, it will say Mike. If we go to user /2, it will say Nick. But what if we were to say a random amount of words? Then it will tell us there's a value error because you cannot convert SDAS to a number. So that's a problem. How can we specify we actually just want to get a number from here and not a string? Well, we specify the type. We say int colon and then the name. Now this will say we want a number or an integer from this URL. And now we can remove that conversion because it will convert this to an integer on its own. Now this will still work if we say user /1, it will give us Mike. User /2, it will give us Nick. User / and then a bunch of letters, it will just say not found instead of throwing an error. So by specifying the type we want, we can make it say not found instead of throwing an error to the user. For a second, I want to quickly go back to this right here. If we say Mike, right, we get Mike. But what will happen if we put HTML inside of this URL? For example, h3 and then Mike. Then you'll notice it actually changes what's on the page. And we never want that. Instead, we want to escape any HTML we get. And that is relatively simple, lucky for us. We can just go from markup save import escape. And this will allow us to escape any markup because HTML is a markup language. And we just do this. Now we escape any hrefs or things that has been added here, and now we'll say href mic instead of making mic in href. This is just one way to make your website more secure. So there's nothing wrong with not having escape here, but just not having it there is just not going to show this href, it's going to convert to an href. But it's better having that escape there just to escape any markup that might be added that we don't want. Now, one more thing, when we go up here and we say mic slash, we actually get a not found. And the reason for that is because by default, Flask has strict routing, meaning that if a route isn't exactly how we specify, for example, here we say ping, if we go just ping, it will work. But if we go ping slash, it will no longer work. This routing method is fine. If you want your routes to be like this, then it is fine. But usually you want it to be optional whether you want that slash there or not. So to make that this doesn't happen, you can add another slash at the end of your route. Now if we refresh, it will say you have been pinged and there is a slash allowed at the end. This means that it's optional. There doesn't have to be a slash there. So if we were to remove the slash, it will still work. But now it will automatically add that slash there for us. So by adding a slash here, you can make it go optionally to this page here. So if we say that, there will, your name is sad. But if we go slash, then it won't work. But if we were to add a slash here, then it will work. So by adding the slash here, you're making adding a slash in your actual link optional. So it's just something you might want to keep in mind depending on what you're doing. Cool. And finally, let's get back to this because that we kind of went over the board there. So here with the types, you can put any type here. So you can put an int, a float, a string. A string is default, of course, just so you know. A path, and a path is basically an input that allows slashes in it. For example, if we go here and we say sad slash that, then it won't work because that's not allowed. It's not a path, it's a string. Here, of course, at the name. That's a string by default. So we need to specify it's a path in order to work. So I'm just going to say path and then where. And we can just go where. And then we can, of course, just print out where. So what path we are actually at. And now if we go here and say user slash and then anything like that, it will give us the path instead of throwing an error. So if we said this here should be a string instead, then it will throw an error because that path does not exist. You have to say path if you want the path to be longer than usual. This is usually if you want to parse a path. I don't often use this, but sometimes you want to be able to add a long pathway to it filled with a bunch of stuff. But that's usually up to you. And then, of course, you have UUID. UUID is just a very special string that is used in some databases usually. You don't have to worry about that. Once you actually use a UUID, you'll go, oh yeah, I can use it here. But until you do, you don't actually ever have to worry about this. And yeah, that is that. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed and understood. If you had any trouble whatsoever, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. And I will see you all again in the next Flask tutorial.